Testing. Have the resources there. I think we're live on YouTube already, but that's okay.
Okay.
We're waiting. I'm getting everything set up here.
If we are, welcome everybody.
Okay. Some new things we're doing today, but I think we're good and going live. We've got one viewer. Hopefully that one viewer can hear us fine. Let us know in the chat, please, if you can't hear us.
I think you're gonna need to get closer to the mic.
Okay. So let's, while I get this kind of set up, I'm gonna pass it over to Pete. Pete, you wanna give us, some updates on what's going, well, just give us an agenda today. What are we talking about?
We're going to be talking about the Second Amendment, one of our favorite topics. And specifically, and I know folks won't be able to see this, but today we filed what's called a Notice of Supplemental Authority in Brombach v. Ferguson. Now, I know our heavy focus on the Second Amendment lately has been House Bill 1240, our Guardian Arms case, and Gators Gun, our Senate Bill 5078 case, which I guess we got an update on that. Yeah, so we've got a lot moving, and it's awesome. I'm super excited. But this notice of supplemental authority is something that folks really need to hear loud and clear. And I think it's the state of, or Judge Benitez in Southern District of California, as well as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe, are tipping the scales in our favor. And that, to me, is huge. That is huge. That is exciting. I'm jazzed. I mean, I'm going to try to not super geek out on what this stuff means legally, but it is very important because it has some very strong bearing on Brombach v. Ferguson, on Gators Guns 1240, and quite frankly, it's going to have some corollary movement on our 1705 and 1240 cases. So, I mean, this is great stuff. This is awesome. You know, we should be out there cheering in the streets, you know, at least once it gets implemented in the state of Washington. So I'm excited.
Right. I am all for cheering in the streets.
I don't think you're on, man.
Yeah, I was muted. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Yeah, a little better. It's still not loud. I gotta check on that sound. We had a visitor in our office today that saw the fancy lights on the board and thought it'd be fun to play with them. I don't blame them. They're real tempting to play with.
Way close.
Yeah, you're way close. That better?
Yeah. You're gonna be in the mic today.
Like I got to be chewing on it today.
Yeah.
So we had a visitor that was playing with the light board, soundboard. So we'll have to make some adjustments, but hopefully you can hear Pete really well because Pete's going to be doing a lot of the talking today. We've got some good analysis for these lawsuits. Super excited about them. You're right. I think we should be celebrating in the streets.
Yeah. So I guess that's the kick over to me. So let's talk about these two cases. So 2 weeks ago yesterday, there's a case that I think has flown largely under the radar for the Second Amendment folks, as well as just for people in general. And it's called Baird v. Bonta. Now, Bonta is the Attorney General of the state of California, and Mark Baird and Richard Gallardo were the two plaintiffs, and this had to do with an open carry ban. And they challenged it, and, of course, not surprisingly, the California District Court's like, oh, that's no big deal. We'll just, no constitutional violation, no biggie, let's go. So they brought it under preliminary injunction. And I want to be super clear. I am like beyond excited, but I'm going to kind of try to tone down my excitement so I can walk through a really good analysis of what this means for you and for me. And I see it, obviously, I mean, to the listeners. And so in Baird v. Bonta, a preliminary injunction was at issue. And what that requires, it's the showing of 4 critical factors. And in addressing these 4 factors, they are that the individual complaining or filing the lawsuit, the plaintiff, is likely to succeed on the merits of the claim, that person is likely to suffer irreparable harm absent overturning that law, that the balance of equities tips in the favor of the plaintiff, and that a preliminary injunction is in the public interest. Now, California District Court in Baird, because this was an open carry question, looks at it and says, oh, we'll just skip to the 3rd and 4th prongs. And the court in Baird says, no, you cannot skip those first 2 prongs. That is whether or not there's a likelihood of success and whether or not there's an actual harm. And the court said, and what it did is it remanded or sent it back down to the district court. The Ninth Circuit said, listen, and this is really extremely important. When it comes to constitutional matters, you have to analyze these things focused on the plaintiff. And it says, I'm reading from the opinion, it is well established the first factor is especially important when a plaintiff alleges a constitutional violation. If a plaintiff in such a case shows he is likely to prevail on the merits, that showing usually demonstrates he is suffering irreparable harm, no matter how brief the violation. So there's a great case that we've cited in all of our cases, almost all of our cases. It's called Elrod versus Burns. It's a 1976 Supreme Court opinion on First Amendment issues, where an individual was challenging a speech regulation. And in that, there's this quick line that says, violation of constitutional rights are irreparable harm, no matter how minimal the injury. So in other words, if I'm the government and I say, Rob, you can't talk. Okay, Rob, you can talk. I violated your First Amendment rights. And for that 1 second. And even if it's for that 1 second, it's still irreparable harm because you lost your constitutional rights. That's how important these rights are. Even the bad courts understand that. And what Baird does is it puts the analysis on the impact to the individual, which is awesome because here we've argued time and time again that no matter whether it's 1240, 1705, 5078, or our doctor's cases, any type of constitutional infringement, no matter how minimal it is, it impacts and directly violates that person's right. Well, in Washington state courts and even some of the federal courts we've dealt in, they kind of just dismiss it. They sweep that under the rug like, oh, it's not irreparable harm. And we've even had a judge tell us, and certainly the states argued, when we cite Elrod in the context of Second Amendment cases, that's inappropriate. Well, there are great cases that talk about it in context of search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment, that do talk about it in Second Amendment kind of softly and off the cuff. Now we get this case out of the Ninth Circuit, which is going to push down all of the federal courts in the state of Washington. And they say that it is irreparable harm. And they even cite to Elrod, and I'm trying to find the place. Regardless, they do cite to Elrod. So it's awesome because now we have this minimal infringement constitutes irreparable harm is now doctrine from all Ninth Circuit courts. And we can bring that in the Second Amendment context because clearly here they're using Elrod in a Second Amendment context. It's an open carry question. So I don't want to overplay, but I also don't want to overlook how important I think Baird will be over the course of the next several years of setting up these preliminary injunctions, these temporary restraining orders. We now get the court, when it comes to gun rights, to focus on this irreparable harm, and that they've got an instruction from their bosses, right? That's what the Ninth Circuit is. Right. There's an instruction. Look very heavily at what is happening to the person. And if they're likely to win, you basically have already shown irreparable harm, and the rest of it falls by the wayside. And so it's awesome because now it's so hyper focused on the individual right, on the injury to the individual, and it clearly brings Elrod into the Elrod analysis of the minimal harm into the Second Amendment conversation. And so I love it because it really brings us back around full circle with true constitutional protections under the Second Amendment. And I think Baird is really going to open the door on these, plaintiff side, or however you want to call it, challenging state action from us and our donors. I think it really opens the door for some awesome victories. So I don't want to, I'm not overselling it. I want to be clear about that. I think this is a huge shift in our favor. And I think Baird will be probably overlooked by some folks. We've already cited to it now twice. Right. We cited to it in this notice of supplemental authority. We also cited to it in a case that Karen and I were briefing. I got to think through. We had a lot moving this week. Give me a second. Dang it. What case were we working on? In Turner versus Washington Medical Commission. Yeah, that was where the 4 doctors sued the medical commission. And we cited to Baird because, again, it's this hyper focus on plaintiffs' rights, on individual rights and constitutional rights. So for the work we do, for what our donors are interested in seeing, I think Baird is going to be that ground shifting case that's obviously super huge. And again, it's great because it brings Elrod into the Second Amendment conversation, and it's great because it puts the focus on irreparable harm via constitutional injury. So yeah, that's case 1 that came out 2 weeks ago.
So I know you're super excited about that, and I'm feeling the excitement from across the table. But I want to let's maybe dumb it down a little bit more for the average watcher. What exactly does this mean for the average citizen right now? Going forward, say we have another, issue an emergency proclamation and our rights are trampled on. What does this mean for us?
Well, again, what this does is, like I said, one of the most important things, and I messaged Austin about this because we've heard the state say, oh, well, Elrod is exclusively limited to First Amendment free speech. Well, if the state's going to take that narrow ruling of Elrod, that it's only speech, not all of the First Amendment, now next time we're told we can't go to church. Now next time we're told whatever 6-round magazines or, search and seizure doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter. All of these constitutional rights that the state is taking, all of these proclamations where it's just like, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's going to change the analysis to say, hey, look, Your Honor, I've been harmed. Look at me. And the judge is going to have to really look deeply at that. And what it does is, I don't want to undersell this. I know I've used that word several times, but it's going to change the analysis of all of the federal courts here. And if they don't listen to Baird, you're going to say, hey, look, how about you reconsider this? you forgot one of the most important things. It was decided 2 weeks ago, or whatever the case is, when the next proclamations come out. So I think this is going to be a huge shield for individual rights for the people of Washington, California, Oregon, Idaho, Hawaii. I think Guam's in there.
Right. So when it comes to the irreparable harm or damages, I'm trying to get as close as I can here. Once again, forgive us for the sound if it's not good. As far as harm and damages go, are you talking? Is there monetary damages we can claim here, or is this simply a idealistic or principled harm that we're talking about? What does it exactly mean when you talk about harm?
I think you're going to get to both, but at a minimum, what it does is it sets the table to enjoying these actions. And I mean, let's think about 5078, right? We filed that thing. It was effective July 1 of 2022. And that just feels like a lifetime ago, right? Now we're at 10 and a half, 9.5, or excuse me, 16, a year and 3 months. We are way beyond, this minimal infringement is irreparable harm. So it changes the analysis of injunction. Now it's also, I think, going to open the door to monetary damages, because if you can get something enjoined and you can prove the harm, you're going to have the benefit of the court looking at it more through your eyes rather than the state's eyes, if you will. And looking through it through your eyes is how, Bruen tells us to do it, right? The state has to prove that gun rights were actually regulated in such a fashion historically. So I think Baird is going to open the door for a lot of good action on behalf of our people.
Right. So, you mentioned Bruen again. Talk about what Bruen means. What happened with this Second Amendment case? I still can't hear myself very well on here, so I'm worried that I'm gonna have to switch over to a different mic. But quickly, this case that came out of the Ninth Circuit in California, Judge Benitez. What did Bruen play into that, and what's he saying today?
Yeah. So Benitez's case is a district court, which is a lower court out of California, the Southern District of California. And what Benitez said, he had the corollary of our 5078. It's California Penal Code 32310, which bans the possession, transfer, sales, use of greater than 10 round magazines. And what Benitez said was, look, we should have enjoined this long ago. He starts to look at it and he says, Bruen tells us that we must look at the history and the text of the Second Amendment to determine whether or not this particular firearm was actually regulated or should be regulated under the history and text of the Second Amendment. And as we know, these 10-round magazines have been around for quite some time. And Benitez today says, listen, Bruen doesn't allow for the regulation of such of the 10-round magazines. And he slaps it down. Everybody's been waiting for this opinion. Like, this is the one in the Second Amendment community that everyone's been waiting for. But, he says, you can't slap someone upside the head any harder than that. Like, listen, there's no tradition. There's no American tradition in saying you can only have less than 10 rounds or 10 rounds or less. Breath. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with colleagues, with friends, that are saying, hey, I can't wait to hear what Benitez says. I can't wait till Benitez comes out with his opinion. Well, he finally came out with it, and this is going to change. It's not binding like the Ninth Circuit's order was, right? It's not binding on our courts here in Washington, so we're not going to have the full benefit that we would under a Ninth Circuit opinion, but it's still a sister court. And, specifically with Judge Dimke sitting on our 5078 challenge in Brumback, it's going to take some time and she'll work through it and we'll see what happens. And I think, God willing, this case is going to play heavily into our analysis.
All right, I got mic check. Oh, that works. I'll turn it back down there. Perfect. I think they can hear me now.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I had to change mics over here, so forgive us if there was a disturbance in the live feed or the video. But we got some major stuff coming out of California. We're super excited about it. I don't know if you can really tell how excited we are. I think Pete was in court today, so I think a little bit of his energy was there. But if you could imagine how exciting it is to know that every one of our cases that have to do with the Second Amendment in Washington are affected by this and will be affected by this, and in the positive way. Let's kind of step back a little bit and talk about the first case that we filed here in Washington concerning the Second Amendment, which was against SB 5078.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is the corollary of Senate Bill 5078 in California. So in Benitez's ruling, the case is Duncan v. Bonta. This, like I said, this is the case that everybody's been sitting, waiting with bated breath, saying, hey, listen, once Judge Benitez rules, this should really set the roadmap. And again, if he does set the roadmap, and if his sister courts like Judge Dimke and Yakima follow suit, and again, I think this is a two-sided sword. You have Baird that says, here's how you have to entertain or judge. This is how you have to review these preliminary injunctions. And then you have Benitez saying, oh, he doesn't even cite the Baird. It's like, well, hey, listen, this doesn't, 10-round magazines is total BS. I mean, he could have written this. This law's BS. It's unconstitutional, period. Instead, he painstakingly puts in 71 pages. I mean, when I read a 70-page case from the Supreme Court, that's because there are 1, 2, or 3 dissents. And it's a 30-page case with 40 pages of what everyone else thinks it should have been. This is a one-man job. So he wrote 71 pages, and mind you, half of this is footnotes. And when they're footnoted, that's single space.
Yeah.
So this is like 100-page. This is a thesis, right? He goes through and painstakingly says, the Second Amendment doesn't allow for a cap on magazines. He does somewhere in here say, well, when it comes to 50 and 100 round drums, that might be an open question. But that's solely because of the numerosity question, right? How it's the common and unusual, whether it's uncommon and unusual, right?
Right.
So if a firearm is commonly used and usual, or the corollary, if it's not uncommon and not unusual, and it's got to be both, then you're covered. Right. And what he says is, okay, so maybe I'll give, he didn't rule on this, he just kind of puts it out there. Maybe 50, 75, and 100-round magazines are uncommon. I don't know. Back to the question.
Yeah, right. Not important, but
right.
We'll talk about it.
And so, to your point, though, you mentioned this, and it might have been not asked, and it might have been in our earlier conversation. He deems the magazine's arms.
Right.
That is super, super, super important, because once you get that status, if you will, as an arm, you're protected. And now all the Bruin analysis, the historicity, the historical analysis, the text analysis, all has to flow back, because you're presumed to be protected.
Right.
So these magazines, I'm calling them you as though they're people, but these magazines are afforded protection of the Second Amendment. Now, we have in our cases in this state open-ended questions. I mean, Judge Zip in Thurston, well, I don't know. I don't know if they're arms.
Right.
Now, she won't be bound by what Benitez says. That's the unfortunate part of this, because it's a federal court versus state.
Okay.
She won't even be fully bound by the Ninth Circuit and Baird. It'll be super, super helpful. It won't be controlling. It'll be like, it'll be that push off the dock, right? Right. It's like, listen, you should listen to this because you could get appealed. She won't be bound by Benitez, but this sets the table certainly for now sitting on Brumback v. Ferguson, where we filed this as a notice of supplemental authority less than an hour ago. It's going to put a position where Dimke's going to have to do one of two things. She's either going to have to accept it and work with it, or she's going to have to work around it, which means that she would have to then intellectually pull apart these arguments and say, you know what? They're not arms, and here's why. Now, the 71 pages is in part because this case is older. It's got more discovery, or it's got discovery. We've provided a couple of declarations from experts about the historical uses of these firearms, and I'm going to call them that because that's what they are, and that's what Benitez says I get to call them. I might not be in San Diego, but I'll listen to him.
So I did have the chance to read through this case and how he defined them and how he came to the fact of them being arms. He does a great job of just laying out the logic of the fact that there are guns that after one round is fired, if there's no magazine present, it cannot be operated again. Magazine has to be reinserted in order for the round to be chambered again. So in that aspect, a magazine actually does become a very important or necessary part of that firearm for it to function. And he has a couple of other explanations in there too, but something that logically anybody that's familiar with firearms already knew and already understood. And it's interesting the lengths that the state went to try and parse out and prove why a magazine shouldn't be considered an arm. And they even came up with arguments that actually argued against themselves. Later you'll see in the case as well. But it's telling to just how obvious it is to those of us who understand the intention of the Second Amendment and why for so long, and he talks about the very important period of time from the time the Second Amendment was ratified in the Bill of Rights until I think it was 1868. I think it was 1791 to 1868. I think were the two dates that he used, and why so many there's just an absence of any firearms restrictions during that period, because it was taken at that time at its word and understood clearly that what the Second Amendment does was define that right as an individual right to carry and bear arms.
Yeah, and you look at the historical text, and it's awesome because, to your point, prior to the 14th Amendment, when states started to regulate things, the federal government and the people of the United States of America accepted the premise that these were protected. And it wasn't how, when, or where. Obviously, you couldn't just go openly shoot someone, that's still murder. But as long as they're used, and I'm not going to say for self-defense, but used in lawful and proper purposes, they were protected. And I think that that's what Benitez gets us back to. It gets us back to square one as to what the Constitution says. And then Baird comes in and says, mess with my constitutional rights. I almost have a win already. Right? Like, we're pitching in the ninth inning at this point.
Right.
Let me just push it over the edge and we're good. And like I said, to your point, I may not seem super jazzed because I want to give people information and how we see this, but this is one of the most important cases related to our work. Both of these cases, these two cases, are probably the most important collective cases we've seen since this foundation has been born. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to undersell our work because we've had some great wins for people. But when it comes to cases that impact how we do what we do, that give us extra oomph, if you will,
right,
these two cases should push us over the finish line in several of our challenges, and it certainly should do so for 5078's challenge in Brumbach, in Yakima. And I think it's going to be extremely helpful in the way we defend gators.
Right. So we can talk about gators, but just so I don't lose this train of thought, is where I'm at with this thought. We're talking about Baird and being so important about our rights. A lot of people ask us about our current, we'll just say our current leadership in the state of Washington, and without being political or anything, because we know that one of the current AG is running for office. What bearing does this have on any of these leaders that have either pushed or supported or voted for these kinds of laws? Is there any repercussions for them having imposed these laws on us?
No, we're not going to be able to clawback damages. That's not going to be on the table. But it should set the table for, we've always believed he's oppressed our rights, and now we've got courts that'll hold him to that. And I think that, when you look at running for attorney general or stepping from attorney general into a gubernatorial position, if you've not defended the rights of the people and not done so well, then if you're challenging the rights that they have and then the courts come out and say, no, they're rights, you don't get to just willy-nilly say they're not. Theoretically, it bodes, bad for him. The question will be, what does that look like in next November?
Right.
I wish it could allow us to cull back some money and fight for this dollar value. I don't see it having that implication, but I do see it having the perspective or the future-looking implication that we're going to have the ability to, I think, see more success. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, to the extent that, he's not able to tout, I won this, I won that, the voters will look and say, oh, maybe he's really... There's a gray area of folk that may have said, okay, well, it's constitutional, the court says so I'm okay with it. And now that the courts start shifting to, no, it's not constitutional, they say, oh, okay, so he's not the good guy I thought he was.
Gotcha. Well, beyond just the political aspect of elections, whatever comes of that, this does allow for us to, at least it gives us a better base in court if a future governor wants to try and suppress our rights.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we've talked about this. Our goal is to not continually play defense and to really understand what we see, foreshadowed in Olympia, or what are the carryover bills from last year that didn't get passed. I think as we look at that list of things and, the carryover things plus this is what we're hearing being talked about, and we can really set things up with cases like Baird to say, okay, hey, we have shied away from certain federal courts. We've shied away, quite frankly, from both,
Eastern, Western,
Eastern and Western. And we've been concerned about taking stuff on appeal to the Ninth. Well, now we're starting to see good laws come out of the Ninth and out of sister courts. And one will be controlling, one will be helpful and compelling. And what it's going to do, talking back about what happened in Duncan, which is the Benitez case, going back to now Dimke is forced to really look at this and say, okay, if I come to a different conclusion, someone's appealing something. I think regardless, someone's appealing something.
Right.
The question will be, if she comes to a different conclusion, the Ninth Circuit is going to absolutely have a field day with two totally different opinions, right? Yeah. The Ninth Circuit might be more apt to go one way or another if they're all kind of in the same direction. So I think, this stuff, again, I don't want to overstate its importance. It's going to lead us in a direction, and it's the direction that we fought to get to.
Right.
And it's exciting. I mean, it's awesome to see that these courts, everyone jokes the Ninth Circus, and it's just, listen, there's hope. There is absolute hope that we're seeing phenomenal opinions that uphold our rights, and we have the ability to stay here. There's this, everyone's kind of running away. Like, I don't want to do it in Washington.
Give me my phone.
Yeah. I don't want to be here. I don't want to fight here. It's not worth the fight. The judges aren't going to listen. Well, now we're seeing judges listen, and it's such an awesome, liberating feeling to be like, okay, we got good, solid opportunities to fight on the home turf. So that's my excitement.
Well, I think it's all of our excitement. I think we're equally excited about it. I mean, I spent my good part of my afternoon reading that case to dissect it and see what it was, see if there's anything that's going to come back and bite us. I don't see anything yet. I think everything is in our favor in many of our cases. I mean, I don't want to say it outright, but I will. The state copy and pasted the arguments from California when they came and argued them against us. After reading through this, I can't believe how lazy, in fact, they were. They didn't come up with any original arguments or thoughts in this fight. And so it's heartening to see that. Look, this fight basically has been fought. It's been eloquently written out and stated in this case, just for us to lay at the feet of Judge Jemke here and say, hey, look, your peer in California has already ruled on this, has already looked at this. Like, to your point, what are you going to do about it? Are you really going to go fly in the face of that decision there? My concern now lies kind of outside of courts. What is the opposition going to do? What's their next move here?
Well, so we're not political, but let's talk elections. You have, so I called him out before. Nick Brown is running for Attorney General. He appeared on our 1240 case literally the day before. He left his position in the, what is it called? The state attorney's office in the Western District of Washington and jumped over to, what are our friends over there? What's that law firm with Kellis and all those guys? Pacifica Law Group.
Okay.
So he jumps over to Pacifica Law Group and signs an agreement to represent Alliance for Gun Responsibility literally day before our hearing, and he is the attorney who shows to the hearing. To your question, I mean, that's where we need to start looking at, the impact. And I think the impact will be Alliance is going to get more aggressive. I don't know what that means. It probably means more bad legislation. It'll be really interesting when you have him running for Attorney General and Makadingra, who is one of the sponsors of all these terrible bills, whether it's, some of the children's sexuality or the gun rights bill. She's been, I believe, if not prime, one of the secondary sponsors on, no joke, all of the ones that start in the Senate. It'll be a question of like maybe who swings harder for the fences, right?
Right.
But if we can get protection through Dimke, through either Cowlitz County or through Thurston County because of these two cases, it's going to make that legislation that much tougher to pass.
Right.
And so it's going to be interesting. I think they're going to get more aggressive in the lobbying game, like Alliance for Gun Responsibility. I really see them, going toe to toe. And of course, what that also means is everything's going to get appealed.
Yeah.
Anything that goes in our favor, we know this is a set for appeal. So, our case like 5078, where we've probably spent equivalent of $40,000 to $50,000 on attorney's fees just in briefing. That's no discovery. That's just briefing. Maybe a little bit less. You're looking at going to $200,000 to $500,000. We're probably gonna have to get outside counsel who are like really good appellate lawyers for the Supreme Court. I think we can handle it certainly at the 9th. Mm-hmm. But there's going to be some questions of practice before the Supreme Court that we'll want help with. And then that also means that we're going to need more staff, just because when it comes down to a Supreme Court argument, we're not going to just want to fly by the seat of our pants. We're going to, dedicate whichever attorney or attorneys for months on end prepping for that.
Right.
Because we don't want to screw it up there.
No. So for our followers and supporters, when it comes to lawsuits, we came out hot from the foundation trying to get preliminary injunctions and TROs because people's jobs were on the line. Time was against us at that point. Now we kind of graduated into cases, to your point, that are long and drawn out and can be fought in the courts over a span of time, where the real enemy is funds. Really, it's who runs out of money first. And when it comes to fighting the state, they have unlimited funds because they just keep on ripping them out of our pockets via taxes. So that's just the reality that we're in right now, is that we're fighting time, and time not so much time, but money really is because time equals money in this aspect. But what I'm trying to get at is I want our followers to feel heartened in the fact that the more people we have, the more people you tell about this fight, and we get the general population, the general public behind these issues, we can cut them off at the head. We can, if we elect the right people, right? To your point about the elections coming up, we get the right people elected. We're not going to have to fight those laws. We get the general public to voice their opinion loud enough and hard enough that these legislators don't think that these laws are something they want to pass on the floor, and they're going to get enough pushback when they're trying to. And that's what this is all about. We went through a period in our history where nobody was speaking up, nobody was fighting back or pushing back with what legislators were doing in the state. We've woken up to it, and we got to keep waking people up to it, because it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money to just fix what we already have. Let's not let them go any further. Let's not cause any more problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, we've always said the law is on our side. And now we're getting courts that come from, the west side of the country, who are reminding us of what our constitutional rights are. I mean, there's nothing better than when the Ninth Circuit or Judge Benitez is like, oh, by the way, you have constitutional rights, guys. Don't forget to exercise those. And
Scott Heino has a question for you. You see it there?
I don't have a specific time frame. I mean, the question was, when Bonta appeals. So when Bonta appeals Duncan, which is the Benitez ruling, how quickly will it be heard? Well, a couple of things. Benitez put a stay on his injunction. An injunction for everyone is a reminder. An injunction is saying from the court, stop enforcing your bad laws. And Benitez put a 10-day stay on the injunction so that Bonta, the state attorney general for California, could file an appeal. My expectation is he'll do so in the next 10 days. And then typically your opening brief is due within 30 days of the notice of appeal. It can be extended another 30 days, so that's 60, up to 60. So this case has a lot of history. So first they got to get the record up. We're talking tens of thousands, like probably closer to 40 or 50 is my guess. I mean, I'd have to reread the record, but this case has a long history and it's got a lot of expert witnesses. So there is, the record's going to take some time to transfer. So let's assume within 15 to 30 days, the record's transferred. You have 30 days from that to file your opening brief. You can extend it to 60. So you're now at 90 days out. And then the answer is due in 30 days, but you can have granted a 30-day extension. So that's so it's like 150, 180 days. Then it's got to get docketed for oral arguments. And then if it really has tens of thousands of pages, you're going to really have to, I could see the court taking some time to get the trial. So, I mean, probably at least 6 months to 9 months. I mean, there's a way to try to expedite it, but a case like this, a lot of our cases, like even Hanford with 300 people, we could have docketed that one fairly quickly because there wasn't a lot of evidence. Because, like you said, it was brought on a TRO, a temporary restraining order, and injunction. It wasn't heavily litigated with a lot of evidence, and so a case like this, it's got a lot of evidence and back and forth. It's going to take some time. I wouldn't expect to see it in oral arguments for at least 6 months.
So my follow-up question would be, so if it takes that long for them to appeal, the injunction stays in effect the entire time?
Yeah.
Or until the appeal or even through the appeal?
Till the Ninth Circuit says otherwise. Okay. Unless the Ninth Circuit does some crazy maneuver where it says they could remand it to the court with instructions, but that would typically require briefing. So, yeah, I mean, basically they got 10 days where they can enforce this, or I guess wake up tomorrow and starting 9 days. And then after that, I would think about 6 months or so before it's fully briefed and potentially, I'm not even going to say it's going to be argued, but potentially argued within 6 to 9 months. And then it could be another month or more. And then there's, you're going to get a panel of 3 judges. I think there's 17 in the Ninth You could do what's called an en banc review, which is a full panel review. I mean, there's a lot. This injunction could be in play for a long time.
So what does an injunction look like for us then? If so 5078, we filed that to the supplemental today.
Yep.
Judge, when potentially could she get back on the bench and rule? Could it be tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, if this pushes her, she could write up an opinion says, go team anti-Bonta, right? Go Duncan and go Baird, and I'm going to follow the ninth, and I'm going to follow Benitez, and I'll just refer to those and so ordered, right? Obviously, she's not going to do that, but again, she told us 30 days.
Yeah.
That would have been pre-Christmas.
Yeah.
So it could be next week, could be this week. Well, not this week, likely, because it's weekend. It could be next week, and it could be, another 3 or 4 months. And quite frankly, with things proceeding in Gators on the 5078, the large capacity magazine sales, that could beat her.
So let's you think it could? Do you think we could hear something before potentially?
Well, I mean,
in the state court. I mean,
I know what 30 days is, right? Like.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get chippy here, but I know what 30 days is, and it's been a hell of a lot longer than that. So she's not under the gun. So here's the interesting thing. State courts, they have rules of the court that force them to rule on certain things within 60 or 90 days. Mm-hmm. A federal court doesn't. And when you look at, again, I mean, we were told 30 days. Now, I didn't expect her to come out before Christmas. I didn't. I really didn't. I hoped. And hoped and hoped and hoped, but because I had because I had never been in front of her, I took her at face value.
Right,
dude. It has been almost 9 months.
Have we seen this a pattern with her? Is this does she wait? Does she sit on decisions like this?
So
as a rule,
in talking with other attorneys, maybe not this egregious, but yeah, it's I was talking with Joel Ard, who's done some other Second Amendment stuff, and our friend Marshall, who practices a lot, and my buddy George, who also practices up there, and not a single one of them has been like, she's quick to respond. Now on little things, she is quick to respond. I mean, I think, I don't want to call it little, but like on our TRO, she was quick to respond, but when it got to the merits of the PI, she sat now for 9-10 months. And I do understand that the volume sucks, right? Like they usually have way more judges. They're really 2 active judges, her and Rice. And then they have a couple that are called senior status, which is really like retired and I'll take what I want. Mm-hmm. Judge Mendoza, who's from our area, I think he's from Prosser, if I remember properly. And then he went to the Eastern District and sat here in Richland. He got elevated to the Ninth Circuit. And then they tried to bring in the lady from Spokane. And if you remember, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, I was grilling her on, I think, Article 4 or something.
Right.
And this was the lady that's like, what? Or I mean, it was as bad as Justice Brown's, what is a woman?
I can't rule on that right now. I'm not a judge. I'm not a scientist.
Right. I mean, so,
what was the judge? What was the judge? Other judge's excuse? Well, at least Ketanji Brown could say she's not a scientist. I mean,
she didn't know.
You should know what Article 2 and Article 4 are. If you're a lawyer.
Well, and she didn't.
And she was a judge. You have to be a judge. Generally, have to be a judge to.
Not always. Not always.
She wasn't a judge. She hadn't.
No, but I think if I recall, she had been a judge in Spokane County.
That's what I thought. She'd been very shortly. But
yeah. I mean, it was like a very short-lived appointment, and and it is what it is. So anyway, they are understaffed. I mean, I'll give them that, but I don't think this is a one-off or where it's a delayed opinion. I do think that these 2 cases will push her. And I hate to speculate on what being pushed means. I would love to see it within a couple weeks. My guess is the bulk of it's written or in her head, or like she's got an outline. Mm-hmm. And, but similarly, the Alliance sent their victory from Oregon Measure 114, right? And so You know,
the federal victory.
yeah.
Because that state
That state court is really hammering on the state, right?
It's going pretty well in our favor, I'd say.
It is, and so that we may see ourselves in an Oregon-like situation where, again, I don't want to assume what she's going to do, but you know, if Dingby doesn't rule, we could certainly see with the state suing Gators, we could see, you know, with the right procedural maneuvers from our side, quicker decisions out of the state court than out of
Federal
Yakima.
court. Interesting.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful that these two decisions today, especially, or not 2 weeks ago, especially with one being from the Ninth Circuit, I think at a minimum that might push her. And if she's analyzed, and let's walk back to 114. If Immergut down there in Portland didn't utilize the proper preliminary injunction analysis, and I'd have to read it again, it's a lengthy ruling. If she didn't put the right focus on the risk and the harm, there's a possibility that they could file a motion for reconsideration. I don't know if they're outside of the 30-day window.
Who's still there? Who's still on that case?
We're still just amicus.
We are.
We never had true status as a party, but you know, we've briefed issues, and you know, to the extent that I would suspect that if we're within the time, that we'll see a motion for reconsideration dropped real quick on the Baird analysis. And I mean, that could be huge. I mean, do you think this is what I'm talking about? Like the far reach of Baird in the Ninth Circuit, it's huge. I mean, any constitutional right now has this real heavy focus on the right and the individual. That's how it should have been.
Right.
You know, that's how the analysis from, there's a case, Winter versus NRDC from the U.S. Supreme Court that's almost 20 years old now, 15 years old, that analyzed it. And that was the first two elements, the harm to the individual and whether or not the person's likely to succeed on the merits. And I really think courts have gotten away from like 1, 2, 3, 4 means something, right? It's just like, oh, it's in a random order. The court in Baird says, no, this is the importance, the order of importance. And you're going to dissect it from 1, then 2. And then if that happens, you've likely won 3, then 4, but you can still analyze. And again, I'd have to look at Immergut's opinion on 114, but Baird may be a huge land shift change. And I will say this, it's 2 weeks old. They are either out of their 30-day window for a motion for reconsideration, or they're probably not going to do it. Otherwise, they probably would have filed it by now. That said, I have an email to probably fire off this weekend and say, hey, are you guys going to do a reconsideration on this?
Right.
So, I mean, it could be really, really long reaching. So that's, again, I know we might not sound excited, but this is my trying to give you information voice. I am excited. I think these cases have significant impact.
Right. What, and you may have, what I was goofing around with this setup, you may have already talked about it, but what kind of bearing does it have on our First Amendment cases that we got in the courts right now?
Well, you know, again, in looking at Baird, not the Benitez ruling, it quotes Elrod v. Burns, which is the First Amendment case of talking about that's where I was telling you about any constitutional violation is irreparable harm, no, regardless how minimal, right?
Right. And the courts have been telling us that's not so necessarily with the voices of our doctors that we're representing, correct?
That's true, but it's also true that the state has argued that only applies to First Amendment context. And that's not true. We've seen it in Fourth Amendment search and seizure cases. We've seen it in Second Amendment cases. But it's always been this undertone. Now with Baird, it's like, hey, we are adopting Elrod as a standard for Second Amendment. And now clearly the state's going to do what it's going to do. And my guess is with all of with our 1240 and 5078 on Gators, where it's in state court, 1705 in state court, they're going to say, well, it's federal law. It doesn't matter, you know? And that's not going to be the case, especially coming from the Ninth. It's going to implicate the analysis in the state courts. So that's where, again, and I know, you know, thank God for Roger Benitez standing for our Second Amendment rights. He's been a saint. You know, he has been a tremendous powerhouse for us. But this Baird case has so much application to so many things because of the Elrod statement, because of the way it's analyzing the preliminary injunction factors, because it's from the Ninth Circuit. For all those reasons, that case is so truly important to everything we're going to do. This one's going to have Benitez, the Duncan v. Bonta is going to have far-reaching effects, especially on the way that a firearm's analyzed, whether that's under 1240 or 5078. He will be tremendously beneficial in that. But because he's a lower court and not in this state, it's going to have less of an impact. I don't want to say minimal, but it's just going to have a lesser impact.
Right.
But collectively, these cases mean a ton to our constituents, or whatever you want to call them, our donors.
Our overall mission, right?
Yeah, because it puts the Constitution at the front and center. And in regards to gun rights, which is the context of both of these cases, it puts the gun rights back into our pockets.
Right. Yeah, no, that's so key. It's so important. And I think that's got my question earlier about what are the effects outside of the courts going to be with these kind of decisions, with the Constitution essentially being backed up and refortified with these decisions in these court cases. Are we going to see that further polarization of the populace of there's the constitutionalists that I want my freedom and I'm going to keep it, or versus the I hate to be hyperbolic and call them all communists and socialists, or essentially what they're where they're going, trying to rip the Constitution to shreds. Are we going to see that hyperpolarization now that the courts are starting to rule in our favor?
I think we're going to see it in the legislature.
Yeah.
Whether it plays down into the general population, I can't tell you. I mean, that's too broad of a swath to cut. I do think that for those who are extreme, the Antifas, that sort of thing, it's going to embolden them and piss them off even more and put them into a frenzy maybe. They may get a little more aggressive, which, obviously they're already aggressive. But I do think it's going to play out in the legislature.
Yeah.
And I think folks like the Macadingras, the Marco Liases of the world, who have put these policies out there that are terrible for our state, are going to have to, I think they're going to feel like they have to dig their heels in and get even more entrenched. Mm-hmm. And the Alliance for Gun Responsibility type folk will entrench them even more. I think it's going to probably put even deeper spending in elections from outside interests.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like, oh, Soros' money's all coming here. No, I think unions in particular are probably going to have more of a focus. When you look at the impact of the Janus case, which was a U.S. Supreme Court case from, I think, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe it was less than that. And it said that you can't compel someone to be a part of a union. And if you don't pay dues to the union, but you're a union member, you're still afforded protections by the union, right? That's really a nutshell version. It's a lot more deep than that. I think that really emboldened unions to get more politically aggressive. They were already there,
right? But
it's like, oh, you cut off my nose, I'm going to chop off your arm, right? And I think that's what we're going to see. And I'm not trying to hammer just on unions, but that's one of the key places where we see a lot of money come into the state when it comes to elections. Yeah. And I think it's going to embolden those people that are behind that. Clearly not all union members think alike. Right. I talk to a lot of my friends that are like, I hate my union. I wish I could drop out. It's like, well, go see our friends at Freedom Foundation. They'll help you opt out.
Right.
When you look at that and the way they spend to get into the political realm, you look at everything that Jay Inslee does. Negotiated the COVID vax $1,000 reward or whatever you want to call it, bonus with the union.
The $1 million lottery.
Right. Everything was with the union. And where was it? Not Open Door. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there are going to be some forces that are from out of state that exist already, that spend already, that put political capital into the courts, into the electorate, and they're going to spend harder and lobby harder. And blank and blank and blank harder, right? And I think it's all that type of, Olympia is going to get even more influx.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we see these cases impacting rights in the way we want to see them impacted.
Right.
Because once the foothold's lost, the foundation crumbles.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. That, if I had to guess, would be the cascading effect of these opinions. And I mean, especially if we get some real good traction in the state of Washington, I think there's going to be a serious free for all to try to overturn that, whether it's from the legislature or just, again, you're going to see groups pop up. You're going to see groups that were quiet rear their heads.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't want to be bleak, but I think it's going to get a little uglier.
It's going to get uglier before it gets better.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be better. I know it's a real weird way of saying it, but our rights will be protected, and that's the better part, and that will happen. I think. I don't want to say immediately. I'll say that's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
Our rights are protected, and then the next step will be that influx comes in and tries to fight back to stamp people like us down.
Right.
I mean, I can almost guarantee you, we start getting victories like this, there's no question that the state's going to be up our backside.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We do everything above board.
Right.
We file our papers as a foundation.
Well, it's funny you said that because I think the Second Amendment Foundation it was an article in the Seattle Times. I know they're suing the AG for him going after them. Can imagine that they're looking for ways to come after us. And you're right. We have to absolutely, dot our I's and cross our T's.
Yeah, and the nice thing about being smaller is we're able to do that with little less effort. Doesn't mean that we're not always constantly vigilant on making sure we're compliant. But, it's stuff like that we're going to pay that attention to see who's pinging us or why they're pinging us, that sort of thing. I mean, look at what happened with the case in Dayton.
Right.
You had a group called Neighbors United for Progress who were 2 years old who decided to sue the county auditor and elections officials and an individual who ran a ballot measure, claiming that it was violating their rights, even though they didn't have the right to vote on it. Like, come on, man. It's in Dayton.
Right.
I think the county population is like 3,800 in Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
And Dayton's probably 2/3, maybe a little bit more. And I'm not trying to, crap on Dayton as a cute little town, but if that's a breeding ground for the combat test, we get wins like this, that combat is going to get a lot harder, a lot deeper, a lot heavier.
Yeah. Do you think, that to your point, being a small town, and being kind of a good lab test for rights, do you think that the confusion that because that case to me has always been an interesting one, because I'm definitely not for shutting libraries down, right? We are totally a First Amendment supporting kind of organization, but at the heart of what that whole argument wasn't about the First Amendment. It was about parental rights and about morality and standards. And it's interesting that became a lawsuit in that aspect, right? It almost turned the whole thing on its head, because they painted our defendant in the light of being the actual one that was trying to take something away or to hurt rights, right? Versus trying to actually exercise their rights as a citizen, filing a petition and doing it. It really, I think that's why we had to look at it from so many different angles when we were deciding what was going to go with it, whether we were going to go with it or not.
Yeah, we don't tread lightly on shutting down a library, especially in a small community where it houses so many resources for so many different people. But Mrs. Roughcorn, our defendant, was painted as this anti-constitutionalist, anti-free speecher. Now, the background of that case was that she'd spent significant time working with the library director to just move the books. You know, I mean, there's certain books I don't want my kids to see. And, you know, I still remember as a kid, you go into a video store, you go, you know, go to a 7-Eleven. So at the video store, there was always a curtain,
Right.
right?
The
And
back
then
room.
like the back room, right?
Yeah. the back room.
And then the same thing, you know, not a back room for 7-Eleven, but the
high
high shelf with black.
Yeah.
Okay. She's basically asking for the 7-Eleven treatment.
Yeah.
Hey, move these out of the reach of my kids. I don't want them to see them. And quite frankly, if you're going there wanting it, you can ask I'm getting heated here, so I want to drop the F-bomb, but you can ask the stinking librarian, hey, where's the XYZ book, right? Where's the genderqueer book or whatever it is you're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And the library can point it to you. And again, it's a small enough library. It's not like the librarian would have to be like, oh, let me look my catalog. And even then, they should have the library cataloged.
Right.
So this concept of she's a book burner or removing speech, all she wanted was out of the reach of her kids so that she could parent her kids without additional influence
Right.
that's already seeping in through the schools, that's already seeping in through, you know, TV, that's already seeping in through social media. The safe place is the library. And so the NUP just grossly overplayed its hand, and, you know, they got what they wanted. They enjoined the action. It's not on the ballot. We were able to get Mrs. Roughcorn out and protect her. And to me, that was really important because I knew an aggressive organization like that would go after her. Now, I think we had a great counter lawsuit and we had great reasons where we could have won, but it's also not my money that's at risk,
Right.
you know? And so that case, to your point, it's the perfect lab. It's can we win this in rural 3,000, 4,000 person counties? And the answer for now, and I want to punctuate for now, is yes. But it also turned our attention to it. It also got some serious media attention to it. So now those of us on the more conservative side of the coin are paying more attention to the Columbia counties of the world. And we're not just saying, oh, it's Columbia County, it's a flyby. Same things happening here in Pasco. Same things happening throughout the Tri-Cities.
Right.
You know, we're supposed to be these, you know, more conservative bastions, and we watch it. We watch it day in, day out, the influx, the influence. And I think, you know, if it doesn't put us on our toes, we're not doing our job. Certainly we as a foundation, we're staying on our toes. But there's also we, the fathers, we, the husbands, and we, the just general voting citizen of Pete and Rob. And if we're not paying attention as those other roles, we're going to lose some freedoms quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think we've talked this subject out. We've hit on the things we wanted to. I don't know. Is there any other updates that we need to share out?
No, I mean there's still a lot moving. There's a lot moving in Gators. We'll probably have an update next week on that, with the AG having sued and what the impacts will be on the civil investigative demand that initiated the case. We had some other cases where hearings were moved. So, you know, we've got a lot that's literally moving and being moved.
Right.
But, you know, obviously the real excitement were, you know, the blessings we got out of the 9th and out of California. And so Benitez, hopefully, you know, this has some serious impact on our Yakima case and Brumbach. And certainly I believe that Baird out of the 9th Circuit is going to have some significant impacts because, again, imagine being a judge and just basically glossing over 2 of 4 elements. And then your boss, the 9th Circuit, says, here you go. Your homework's coming back to you. Don't forget points 1 and 2. And, oh, by the way, those are the most important. You gloss over again, you know, we'll overturn you again, or we'll just say you're wrong.
Yeah.
So that's the excitement of Baird is no one likes their homework back, and this judge is getting it back and saying, here's your incomplete.
Right.
And it also said to do it quickly, or there's expeditiously, I believe was the word. Yeah. We're sending it back to the district court to complete its preliminary injunction review expeditiously. So, hey, Judge, you may have a ton on your plate today. I don't care. I'm the Ninth Circuit telling you, get back to this and get it to us quickly.
Figure it out.
And the good news is the Ninth isn't going to just accept crap. So, yeah, it's an exciting day for us. I think there's a lot to celebrate, and I think it's going to open some doors, and hopefully those will be really beneficial to the people that we serve.
Absolutely. Awesome. I'm excited. I'm not gonna lie. This week's been kind of tough, been kind of down on everything. We're in the throes of it, and then to have this just to end our week and pick us up for the weekend, it's been great. Thanks for those of you who have commented, asked questions. We encourage activity and being part of the podcast as much as possible. We do these so that we can keep you informed of the work. Those that donate to us, we know that it's important that you know where your dollars are going, where your hard-earned money is going, and that it's going to fight for your rights, and that we're being as diligent as we possibly can with that. And we love to interact and hear what you have to say. And any questions you have, any comments or concerns, please send them our way. And if you're watching this, please share. We get shadow banned, and our message doesn't get out as far and as wide as we'd like it to. And there are a lot more people that every day learn about us and are able to help us with more hands and more help, more support, the more we can do. So please share, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.